My name is Gianna. I'm 16 years old. I live with my mom and my stepfather, Mark, in a two-story house in a quiet suburb in Northern California. On the outside, we looked like the perfect family. Full dinners, neatly trimmed grass, curtains always open to let the sunlight in. But that fateful night, all of that perfect facade collapsed. I had just changed clothes when I noticed a faint blinking light on the bookshelf near my bed. When I got closer, I discovered a tiny camera cleverly disguised as a decoration. My breath caught, my hands trembled as I pulled it out. While checking where the device was connected, my heart nearly stopped when the words flashed clearly across the screen, transmitting data to Mark Morrison. That was my stepfather's full name. The man my mom always praised as the savior who rescued both of us from debt after my dad died. I froze. This wasn't monitoring for protection. This wasn't care. This was control, manipulation, a plan to choke out every last shred of freedom I had left inside this house. Have you ever lived in a place where every step, every breath you take, is under the gaze of someone you're forced to call family? If you've ever felt suffocated in the very place that was supposed to be your home, leave a comment below. Hit like if your heart aches hearing this. And don't forget to subscribe to hear the rest of my story. When the truth began to crack open with that tiny hidden camera. I still remember so clearly the last peaceful morning in our old home, where my dad's familiar footsteps echoed in the kitchen, my mom's soft laughter came from the living room, and the smell of waffles spread through our small house. Back then, everything was simple, yet full of love. My dad was the one who placed his hand on my shoulder when I panicked over a math test, the one who held my mom's hand whenever she coughed, the one who never let me forget that I was seen and heard, and then that runaway truck on the mountain pass took it all away. My dad died instantly at the scene. Police knocked on our door at 3 a.m. I heard my mom scream as if someone had ripped her heart out. I didn't cry right away. I just stood there in my sweat-soaked pajamas, watching her collapse on the floor, clutching the shattered phone, and I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The months that followed were hollow. Mom stopped cooking, stopped putting on makeup, stopped remembering appointments. I sat for hours in my room holding a picture of the three of us taken at Lakewood Park the summer before. I tried to stay steady so I wouldn't become another burden for her. But the harder I tried, the more invisible I felt. Then Mark appeared. He came with a church support group. Warm voice, kind smile, tailored suit, and a shiny SUV. I remember Mom saying he lost his wife to cancer. He knows what it's like to suffer loss. At our first dinner, Mark gave me a small gift, a smartwatch. So, you can always check the time without pulling out your phone in class, he said, staring straight at me. I forced a smile, thanked him, but something inside me shrank. Maybe it was the way he gripped my mom's hand too tightly when she laughed, or how his eyes never left me even for a second. 2 months later, they were married. The wedding was simple, held in the churchyard. I wore a light purple dress and held a bouquet of fake flowers Mom ordered online. She smiled brightly that day. I tried to smile too. And Mark, he hugged me for far too long when the ceremony ended, whispering in my ear, "Now our family is complete, isn't it, princess?" I hated the way he called me princess. Mom began leaning on Mark for everything. He paid off the mortgage, cleared the stack of hospital bills, even bought her a new car. Slowly, she stopped grocery shopping on her own, stopped going to parent meetings, stopped asking me about anything at all. Mark did everything a model husband should do, but no one noticed I was fading inside my own home. He started helping me manage my time. At first, it was reminders about homework. Then it became checking my assignments. Then, interfering with my friendships. "Jessica is too loud, not a good influence for the daughter of a widow," he said while standing at the kitchen counter. eyes glued to my phone where he had just installed a parent monitor app. When I protested, Mom brushed it aside. You have to understand, Mark only wants the best for you. You should be grateful instead of arguing. I wanted to scream, but he's not my dad. But I stayed silent because Mom's eyes grew colder each time I pushed back. Something in her had shifted, like she was willing to trade anything to keep this man, even her daughter. One afternoon, Mark handed me a new phone. Family plan, he said. It keeps costs down and it syncs with your parents' devices. I looked at the screen, preloaded with tracking apps, browsing logs, and notes. I smiled faintly and replied, Thanks. I wasn't stupid. I knew I was being monitored. But the scariest part wasn't that he checked where I went, what I said, or who I texted. It was that my mom stood beside him, smiling, fully believing he did it out of love. I was no longer the Gianna I used to be. I couldn't choose friends, couldn't walk home after dusk, couldn't text anyone privately without risking my messages being analyzed under the name of online safety. And then, that hidden camera in my bedroom was the final straw. No one has the right to watch the place where I change clothes, where I write my journal, where I cry every night. I shuddered when I saw the email linked to the device. There was no doubt anymore. No more excuses about strictness out of care. This was a full-scale control plan, and I was the target meant to be broken. I yanked the plug, hid the camera in a shoebox under my bed, and sat frozen for 3 hours, not knowing what to do next. If I told Mom, she'd say I was paranoid. If I called the police, I had no proof beyond a gadget found on a shelf. And Mark, he held everything. The finances, my mom's trust, my social media, and now every breath I took at night. All I had left was myself. But I had survived my dad's death. I had lived through a home that no longer had warmth. I knew I couldn't wait for someone to save me. I had to find a way, and it would begin exactly where he least expected. The next morning, I woke feeling like I was inside a glass cage. Not because of the sunlight coming through the curtains, but because of the invisible presence of the camera I had pulled out the night before. As if, even with it turned off, Mark's eyes were still somewhere in the room watching me. I washed my face quickly, put on my uniform, and went downstairs. Mark was already at the table, coffee steaming by his right hand, phone in his left. Mom was frying eggs, her face unsettlingly calm, like everything was perfectly normal. Sleep well, kiddo? Mark asked, eyes never leaving his screen. I didn't answer. I just sat down, pulled the cereal bowl closer. Not gonna say good morning to your dad? His voice dropped lower, steady, but I could hear the chill inside it. Mom turned around instantly. Gianna, say something. He's talking to you. I looked at her, then at Mark. I slept fine. She's been different lately, he sighed, glancing at my mom. I think we should talk to her teachers. Maybe she's under some mental pressure. I nearly spilled milk on the table. I'm perfectly fine, I snapped. The one with the problem knows exactly who that is. My mom slammed the frying pan onto the counter. Gianna, I don't want to hear anymore. You're being disrespectful to the man who sacrificed so much for us. Without Mark, where do you think we'd be living right now? I bit my lip hard, holding back each breath. Not out of fear, out of pain. Because the woman who once taught me how to stand up after falling was now repeating Mark's words to silence me. Sacrifice doesn't mean having the right to monitor my every move, I replied slowly, and it definitely doesn't mean putting a camera in my bedroom. The words hung in the kitchen. Mom froze. Mark tilted his head slightly, eyes wide for a moment before he regained his calm. Camera? He chuckled softly. What are you talking about, Gianna? You're imagining things. I found it. It's in my drawer. If Mom wants to see, that's enough. Mom cut me off, her voice trembling. I don't want to hear any more. You're becoming paranoid. I stood from the table, pushed the chair back, carrying with me the heavy weight of betrayal filling my chest. In Mom's eyes, I was no longer someone to believe. In Mark's eyes, I was only a target to control, and I knew if I kept confronting him head on, I would always lose. That afternoon, I sat in the school library, opened the laptop. Mom bought me at the start of the year. Still the same device, Mark had forced me to log into his family management account. I quietly used a hidden USB drive to run a virtual operating system. Beneath the mask of a dutiful student, I was learning to protect myself with the very technology Mark thought only he controlled. I checked the camera's transmission logs. It had been disconnected, but I found traces of logins from our home IP address. That meant there had been more than one device. He had tried different angles. Some sessions even showed remote adjustments. I saved screenshots, copied the details, and hid them inside a history presentation file. If Mark checked, he wouldn't notice anything. I wasn't waiting for someone to help me anymore. I had to carve out my own way before things went too far. That evening, Mark called me into the living room. Mom sat there, looking tired. On the table lay printed papers from a school psychologist. "We want you to try a behavioral evaluation," he said. "The school recommended it, just a few light sessions. Or maybe it's a way to legitimize your plan to send me away." "What nonsense are you talking about?" Mom raised her voice. I stared straight at Mark. "I saw your emails to Beacon Ridge Academy. You asked about their boarding program for students under surveillance. Don't bother denying it." Mark kept his calm. "I was just exploring options in case things got worse. Every family plans ahead." "Isn't that right, Linda?" Mom nodded reflexively, though it was clear she'd never heard of this before. I turned away, leaving behind a suffocating silence. This house had become a closed maze, where I no longer had the right to speak the truth without being branded as rebellious. I went back to my room, locked the door, turned off the lights, opened my laptop under the dim glow of the night lamp. No one knew that in that very moment, I was mapping out a way to unlock every chain Mark had put on my life. Not with fists, with memory, data, and patience. I no longer needed to scream to resist. I would make him expose himself layer by layer. Somewhere along the way, I began sleeping in a half-awake state. Every night, before turning off the light, I checked the lock on my door at least 3 times, dragged my desk in front of it as a flimsy barricade. But still, some nights I woke up sensing something was wrong, a breath too close to my face, the creak of a hinge, the faint sound of floorboards shifting in the hallway. I wasn't imagining it. That night, when I peeked through barely open eyes, Mark was sitting on the edge of my bed, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on my face, as if studying a strange specimen. His shadow stretched long across the wall from the hallway light, spilling through the cracked door. I lay still, breathing evenly as if asleep. My heart pounded in my chest like a drum of warning. Mark reached out, so lightly I could barely feel anything except a chill running down my spine. His hand slid into my hair, slowly stroking, as if soothing a tame cat. "My good little girl," he whispered, his voice low and raspy, like a sick lullaby. "Just do as you're told, everything will be so much easier." I bit down hard enough to taste blood, but still didn't dare move. If I turned, if I spoke, Mom would come running, but who would she believe? Mark sat there for a long time, silent. Finally, he stood, moving as softly as if he had never been there, closing the door without locking it. I lay frozen under the blanket, not daring to let a single tear fall for fear the sound would betray me. The next morning, I didn't go down for breakfast. I locked my door and wrote. Not in a diary, the one that had already been taken, but on a loose sheet of paper I tucked deep into the spine of a math book in my backpack. At school, I went straight to Miss Natalie's office, my English teacher. She was the only one who had ever put a hand on my shoulder after a group presentation and told me I had a gift for telling stories with feeling. I didn't trust adults easily anymore, but I had to try. "Can you keep a secret?" I asked, sitting across from her, my hand still gripping the strap of my backpack. Miss Natalie looked at me seriously. "As long as it's not a secret that puts you or anyone else in immediate danger, I'll listen." I shared pieces. Not everything, because I knew if I said too much without proof, it would be dismissed as teenage exaggeration. But I told her about how Mark came into my room at night, about how he once stroked my hair while I slept, about how he controlled every device in the house, even the Wi-Fi router he kept locked in his office. She listened carefully, never interrupted. Just rested her hand on a file and asked gently, "Gianna, do you have any concrete proof? A camera? Messages? A recording?" I was quiet for a while. "Not yet. I've only just started collecting." "I believe you're going through something very frightening," she said. "But to take legal action or report it to the administration, I need something specific. They'll demand details. Do you understand?" I nodded, my throat tight. "Do you feel like you're in danger right now?" I thought carefully. "Not yet, but I don't feel safe at home." "Miss." Natalie wrote that down, then said she would keep a closer eye on me. She also offered her office as a safe place whenever I needed quiet. I thanked her, then stepped into the hallway, feeling both lighter and more lost. No one denied my feelings, but no one could really help me either. That night, when I came home, Mark was standing at my door holding a plate of sliced apples, smiling as if he had never invaded my space without permission. "Your mom said you weren't feeling well. I brought you something to eat. You shouldn't skip meals." I didn't reach out. "I'm not hungry." "You know," he said softly, "teenagers often think they're stronger than they really are. But the truth is, the world is dangerous." I looked him straight in the eye. "That's why adults have to learn not to be the danger inside their own homes." Mark didn't react. He just set the plate on my desk and walked away. The door closed gently, but wasn't locked. I immediately bolted it, dragged a chair behind, and opened my laptop. I knew I couldn't easily record his voice, but there were things I could capture. The times my door opened, webcam logs if I installed the right software, and most importantly, the unusual presence in the middle of the night. I launched a small program, set my webcam to face the door and bed, and began recording every night. If he came back, there would be proof. But I didn't stop there. I also scheduled automatic emails to an anonymous account each time a new video was saved. If Mark ever accessed my laptop, I would still be one step ahead. Everything I did now wasn't just about surviving, it was about preparing. I would make every one of his invisible acts into undeniable truth. No one could say I imagined it. No one could tell me there's no real evidence again. And one day, I would make Mom see everything she was closing her eyes to. Megan was the last person I had left. When everything began to blur, when Mom no longer looked at me with love, when Mark sat in my room at night with his cold hand on my hair, Megan was the only one still texting me. "Are you okay? Want to sneak to the library today? If you need me, just say the word." We'd been together since 6th grade, shared sandwiches under the oak tree behind the gym, snuck into the school auditorium to practice old Taylor Swift songs. I thought nothing could separate us. Then Mark called her parents. I found out from a short text. My parents said, "You have mental problems. I can't see you anymore." I read that line over and over, like someone had poured ice water into my chest. I called. No answer. I texted. No reply. When I tried to approach her at school, she turned away, her eyes full of regret but also fear. I didn't blame her. I just stood there, watching her shrinking figure, then turned as if we had never known each other. I hadn't lost Megan. I had been cut off from her. With a single phone call, Mark had planned it. He hadn't just called Megan's family. Nearly every friend who had ever texted or called me stopped all at once. Some ignored me. Some sent short apologies, repeating the same line, "We don't want to get dragged into this." No one explained, but I understood. Mark had built a new story for them. I was a disturbed, rebellious girl, maybe even dangerous. I started noticing how people looked at me in the hallway. Hesitant stares, whispers behind my back, anonymous messages on social media. "Have you gotten help yet? Does your mom know you're like this? I heard you got expelled from your old school." No one at this school knew I had ever studied anywhere else. But Mark knew. He had dug into every detail to paint a new portrait of me. A child who needed to be monitored, isolated, even treated. Even social media was no longer an escape. Every time I posted even just a picture of tea or a movie poster, Mom asked about it the next day. Once I posted a sad quote, and Mark printed it, laid it on the dining table, and said, "What exactly are you trying to say with this?" I checked my devices. Every account showed signs of being accessed from an unknown IP. I changed passwords. He installed a keylogger. I made new accounts, Mom asked instantly. "Why do you need anonymous profiles?" I locked everything. No more Instagram, no more Messenger, no more Reddit groups where I once shared comics and coding. My world shrank to 3 points. My bedroom, the school library, and Mark's gaze, always present as if he controlled the very air around me. I started writing on paper instead of typing, documenting dates, names of people Mark had called, their reactions. I sealed them in envelopes, hid them under the library mattress. Each day, I replaced one with a new note. If someone found them, there would be evidence. If I disappeared, something would still speak for me. I didn't think I could bear more, but then Mom took another step that nearly broke me. One afternoon, coming home from school, I saw her and Mark sitting in the living room, side by side like a couple discussing real estate. On the table lay a stack of files stamped with the logo of a boarding education counseling center. "You should consider moving to a more positive environment," Mom said, looking at me but not seeing me. "Somewhere with professionals who really care about your feelings. Here, I feel helpless." Mark folded his arms. "In fact, several schools have already agreed to review your case. Some are very reputable." I said nothing. I just looked at Mom. The woman who once soothed me through fevers, who once held my hand every weekend at the park, was preparing to sign papers to send me away legally, quietly. "I don't need professionals," I said softly. "I need someone who will listen to me instead of believing everything he invents." "Enough." Mom put the pen down hard. "You're insulting the man who saved us." I nodded. Not in agreement, but because I finally understood where I stood in this house. That night, I went to my room, locked the door tight. I pulled out the box of documents from under the bed, checked each page, each date. I reopened the folder of videos on my laptop, compared the light, the times Mark entered. Everything was stored on an external drive hidden deep in the back of my backpack for extracurriculars, a bag I knew Mom would never check. I stared at the screen for a long time, with only one thought: I had to stay one step ahead of him. If not, I wouldn't be here to tell what was happening. That night, when the lamp went off, I didn't lie in bed. I sat against the wall near the window, backpack under my head, eyes wide open into the dark. Since my diary had been taken, I couldn't lie down without thinking Mark was watching through the crack in the door, from the hallway, or worse, from the darkness inside my own room. I reset the mini camera on my desk, adjusted the angle to catch both the door and the bed. A thin wire ran straight to my laptop, the recording program ticking down. Each frame was encrypted and auto-saved to the external drive I carried, even while I slept. I had lost too much already. I couldn't let the evidence slip away again. 3 days later, while I was eating lunch alone in the back of the schoolyard, my old phone buzzed in my pocket. An unfamiliar number flashed. I hesitated, then answered. Gianna? A middle-aged woman's voice, low and cautious. It's Aunt Karen. I got your letter. I stopped breathing for a moment. My throat tightened. Are you okay? She asked, her voice trembling. The letter was too short. I couldn't understand it fully. What's happening at home? I didn't answer right away. My heart pounded, each beat like a drum in my chest. I froze at the word home, she had just said. That place wasn't a home anymore. I can't say much on the phone, I whispered. I need to see you, but it has to be at school, after classes. Can you come? I'll be there. The call ended quickly. I sat still for a moment longer, gripping the old phone in my hand. The late autumn wind blew through my hair, tugging lightly at the scarf trailing behind me, but I didn't feel cold. For the first time in weeks, I felt something that resembled hope. That night, Mark was waiting at the dinner table again. In his hand was a new stack of files. I didn't need to ask. I knew he was about to present his next humane solution to my so-called instability. We need to have a serious talk, he began. Your mother and I have thought this through. We're sending your file to a behavioral treatment center in Montana. There, you'll study, get therapy, and most importantly, you'll be under professional supervision. I looked up. Which center? Northwell Ridge, he answered without blinking. A place that specializes in cases like yours. Strong discipline, clear rules, and most importantly, they don't allow students to leave without the consent of their legal guardian. I froze at that last part. You mean you're planning to cut Mom out of guardianship? Mark smiled. You know, in many cases, to speed up paperwork, the school prefers one responsible party. Your mother isn't familiar with legal procedures. I've handled that. I turned to my mom. She sat across the table, hands on the surface, eyes red but silent. I stared at her for a long time, hoping to see even the smallest flicker of resistance, a tiny gesture that showed she was still awake inside. But she only bowed her head, silent as a statue carved from exhaustion. I'm not going anywhere, I said firmly. I'm not a prisoner for you to ship off to a reformatory. Mark shrugged. This isn't about feelings. You're hurting this family. And if you can't cooperate, then someone else needs to help you see yourself clearly. I walked away, heart pounding in my chest. Instead of my room, I slipped into the bathroom, locked the door, turned on the faucet, and pulled the old phone from my coat pocket. I texted Aunt Karen, tomorrow, 3:15 p.m. East Yard, corner of school. Don't park at the front gate. The next afternoon, after my last class, I slipped out the back door of the library. Aunt Karen was there wearing a thick gray sweater, her hair tied in a neat bun. Her eyes scanned the yard before landing on me. For a split second, I felt like I was 8 years old again, diving into her arms during a summer thunderstorm. Gianna, she called, hurrying toward me. You've lost so much weight. I didn't hug her, not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid if I touched anyone for too long, I'd fall apart. Can you help me? I asked, unblinking. I'll do everything I can, she said, her voice steady. I handed her a thick envelope, copies of my notes, photos, videos, and parts of my digital journal I had printed. This is everything I still have. She took it without questions, only nodded. Do you want to leave there right now? I can't, I said. If I disappear suddenly, Mark will twist it into me running away because of mental issues. I need him to expose himself. I just need you to keep the evidence. And when the time comes, step forward. She studied me for a long time, as if trying to see whether I was still the same child or had become someone else. Entirely. Then she whispered, "You've grown more than I thought." I didn't choose that, I replied. Before we parted, she said, "If it's urgent, call me. I'll come no matter the time." I nodded and turned away. On my way back to the gate, I saw Mark waiting in the car. The window slid down, and he motioned for me to get in, his face blank. I opened the door, sat in the passenger seat, clutching my backpack like a shield. "Where were you?" he asked. "The library," I said, eyes fixed on the windshield. He asked nothing else. The car rolled forward. I didn't turn back, but in my pocket, I held tight to the slip of paper with Aunt Karen's number. In that house, I had no one left on my side. But now, I wasn't alone anymore. I couldn't remember how long I stood behind the door of Mark's office, in the eerie silence of the upstairs hallway, pressing my breath into my chest as if the faintest sound would shatter every plan. The door wasn't fully shut. Through the crack, I heard his voice steady, low, emotionless. "Yes, the forms are filled. I attached the full reports from the psychologist and school. The behavior assessments are signed. I just need the final confirmation from the center and an intake date." The other voice came through the speakerphone. "We still need to verify legal guardianship. Does the mother still retain medical authority?" Mark hesitated half a second. I pressed closer to the wall. "No, I'm filing for an adjustment of guardianship. The mother has agreed that I'll handle all treatment and education decisions." My legs nearly gave out. Adjustment of guardianship. No longer a threat, no longer a vague argument at dinner. He had actually initiated legal steps to make me his dependent completely without mom, without any relative's consent. That meant once I was taken away, nothing could stop him from keeping me somewhere far, with no one to contact, no right to resist, and no one allowed to ask why I had vanished. I stepped back quietly, retreating before he noticed. Inside my head, it was like fire exploding, fear and rage tangled together. But I couldn't act on emotion. I couldn't slip. Every step now had to be as precise as a pawn balancing on the edge of a cliff. Back in my room, I shut the door, drew the curtains, and sat on the floor with my back against the bookcase. I plugged in my external drive, opened the encrypted folder. From this moment, I didn't just need proof he was watching me or entering my room. I needed evidence that Mark was manipulating the entire system, medical, educational, legal, to isolate me completely. I checked Mom's email and her browsing history on the computer she used once a week. Empty. Nothing related to the forms Mark mentioned. She had never even logged into the boarding school portal. That made one thing clear. Mark had forged her signature. Or at the very least, he had done everything without her knowledge. I set up my camera, recorded myself analyzing the documents, captured audio from the hidden camera of him talking about forced treatment, clips of him entering my room at night, and screenshots of his emails to the center with the line, "Mother has agreed to surrender medical authority. Mom had never signed anything. I was certain. And if anyone asked, she couldn't explain something she never knew." The next evening, Mark played his role again. He knocked twice on my door. "Gianna, come down for dinner. Your mom made salmon." I didn't answer. I knew he was still testing me, watching for signs I had discovered anything. The calmer I seemed, the more time I bought. At dinner, I observed him quietly. He smiled at Mom, served food onto her plate, spoke about work in the patient tone of a devoted husband. My mom forced a smile, but her face carried a lost expression, like she was sitting inside a pre-painted family portrait without knowing who she was anymore. I poured water, set my glass down lightly. "Mom, did you read my registration forms?" Mark froze for 1 second. Mom lifted her head. "What forms?" "The boarding school he's sending me to, in Montana, Northwell Ridge." She turned to Mark, confused. You said it was just research." Mark laid his fork down, voice calm. "Linda, I told you last week. I emailed you, printed everything, left it on your desk. You just didn't read it. I never saw anything." Her voice trembled. I didn't agree to this. I looked at her for a long time. Not angry, not blaming. I just needed her to say it out loud, and say it in front of him. Mark forced a smile. Come on, let's not make a scene in front of the child. Linda, you're overwhelmed. Let me handle it. I only want what's best for Gianna. I pushed my chair back, voice firm. I'm not going anywhere. If you keep filing those forms, I'll send all this evidence to Child Protective Services. And if needed, I'll report the forged guardianship documents. Mark's gaze shifted, surprise hardening into ice. You think you have the right to make demands of your parents? I didn't answer. I looked straight at Mom. You don't have to do anything. Just don't sign anything else without reading carefully. She froze, then nodded slightly. That night, in my room, I locked the door, bolted it. I copied the video of Mom admitting she had never seen the forms and sent another copy to Aunt Karen with a message. If he sends anything else to that center, give everything to the lawyer immediately. I had seen his plan clearly, and I had started writing mine, a plan he would never expect, a plan where this time I was leading. Aunt Karen appeared on a Saturday afternoon, just as Mark was fixing the garden hose outside and Mom was buried in bills. I hadn't been warned. When the door opened, I stood frozen in my old paint-stained sweater, staring at her slender figure stepping in like a ghost from a faraway memory. Hello, everyone, she said, carrying a basket of fresh apples. I was passing through town and thought I'd stop by. It's been too long since I've seen Gianna. Mark looked up from the yard, squinting. We didn't know you'd be dropping in. Surprises are more fun, she smiled casually, but her eyes lingered on me for a beat longer. I stepped back, gave the slightest signal with my eyes. She nodded faintly, like a reflex from years ago when I'd slip her a bad test paper hidden in my hand, silently begging for help. We went inside. Mom lit up, poured tea, chatted about the weather, the church roof repairs, random gossip about relatives in Massachusetts. I sat quietly in the corner, watching Mark for the first flicker of suspicion. But he stayed perfectly calm, leaned back, one hand on his knee, the picture of politeness. Only his eyes betrayed him, tracking my every move. Aunt Karen asked me a few polite questions. How's school going? Do you like it there? I nodded slightly. I'm fine. She barely talks. Mark cut in. These past months, it's like something's in her head no one can understand. Probably just teenage stuff. Sometimes it's not what's in their head, my aunt replied gently, but what happens around them that keeps them quiet. The air stiffened. I seized the moment when Mom went to fetch cookies from the kitchen. I stepped closer to Aunt Karen, bent down as if picking up a fallen handkerchief. In that split second, I slipped a folded note into the pocket of her gray coat. It read only, "Help me. Mark wants to take me away. I have proof." I didn't know if she would read it, didn't know if she could keep it safe. But the look in her eyes as she left was different taut, a fragile thread of tension stretched between us. 3 days later, I found a small package in my school desk, sent under another student's name. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, handwritten. Read it. I believe you. Send every copy you have to the old address. I'm investigating further. Be careful. Don't let anyone see this letter. Burn it after reading. I rolled the paper up, slipped it into my jacket pocket, and after the last class went straight to the library. In the copy room, I photocopied part of the documents I had collected, sealed them carefully in a large envelope, and pressed the flap shut. On the way home, I stopped by the bus terminal at the end of the street, slipped the envelope into the mailbox next to the service counter, stamped it, and sent it to my aunt's address in Norwell, Massachusetts. A few days later, Mark began to show signs of unease. That night, he stood at my doorway without knocking, just a still shadow while I pretended to study. Who have you been in touch with? I didn't look at him. No one. I'm asking seriously. Have you texted relatives? Has anyone asked about our family lately? I pretended to frown. No. Why are you asking? It's nothing. He stood a moment longer and walked away. But that night, I heard him whispering into the phone from his office, voice harsh and rushed. The next day, I passed Mom's room and saw the door half open. She sat at her desk, staring at a document. I stepped closer, ready to knock, but froze. It was a copy of the guardianship transfer request, not the draft Mark had shown before. This one had a red stamp, issued from the county court. I turned and walked away immediately, my heart pounding. Mark had really filed it, and the court had already started processing. But he didn't know someone else was quietly watching too, and I wasn't standing alone anymore. 2 days later, Aunt Karen called from a private number. I was in the music room rehearsing for the semester performance. I excused myself and stepped outside to answer. Gianna, she said quickly, I checked Northwell Ridge. It's not a normal school. It has a history of lawsuits for psychological abuse and forced isolation. I'm working with a lawyer, but you need to be more careful. Mark doesn't just want control, he wants to turn you into a shadow. I froze, fingers tightening around the phone. I've already sent the initial file to Child and Family Services. I didn't mention your name, but if you allow, I'll step forward. First, you have to stay safe long enough to reach that point. I understand, I whispered. I'll keep digging. Do you have cameras or other audio evidence? Yes. I've sent one set, another is hidden. If I'm found out, I still have one last line of defense. I'm proud of you for not giving in. But don't take risks. If there's any emergency, leave immediately. Don't wait for it all to collapse. Can't go while he's still forging papers. I want to turn it back on him. Right in front of Mom. Then I'll help you do that. I hung up and returned to class, my hands still trembling, but my eyes no longer the same. No one in the music room or the hallway knew what I carried in my pocket. Mark's plan he could never see. The trust Aunt Karen was holding for me, and a truth about to be revealed just when he thought he had already won. After that call with Aunt Karen, I entered a stage I hadn't expected myself, learning to act like the good child. Not because I wanted Mark's approval, but because I needed time. I needed his guard lowered. I needed a mask to move without suspicion. I started cleaning the living room on my own, helping Mom with dishes, even sitting with Mark to watch baseball whenever he sat alone with a beer in front of the screen. The harsh words he used to throw at me seemed to soften a little, or maybe he was just too busy plotting to notice the true meaning behind my smile. Much better, Mark said, when he saw me folding his laundry neatly into a basket. I just smiled. I think I needed to change. Maybe I've been too stubborn. He nodded, barely hiding his satisfaction. That was when I knew I was close enough to strike. I began paying closer attention to his computer habits. He usually brought his laptop upstairs at night, but often left the charger in the kitchen by the coffee counter. I studied the way he typed his password, the first 4 letters of his grandfather's name plus the last 4 digits of his wedding date. I had heard him brag about it once at dinner months ago. A useless detail until now. That evening, Mark left his laptop on the kitchen table while he took out the trash. I had only minutes. I slipped a USB drive from my pocket, plugged it into the left port, eyes fixed on the screen. When I typed the password, the words, "Welcome, Mark S." flashed across, sending a jolt down my spine. The first folder I opened was private docs. Inside were emails between Mark and a man named Joel Barrett, executive director of a place called Clear Horizons Academy. The subject line made my stomach drop. Finalizing transfer papers for Gianna Morrison, immediate placement preferred. I saved everything to the USB. Next was a contract file, full of legal clauses, but one section I couldn't look away from. Sole legal guardian, Mark Stephen Morrison. Biological mother waives all decision-making rights, confirmed by signed consent. I bit my lip until it bled. Below was an itinerary for a flight to Idaho on the 16th of next month with a note, private car transfer from airport to facility. Maintain 72-hour isolation period. My hands shook, but I couldn't slow down. I checked the audio memo folder, Mark's voice logs he used as reminders. One recent file, titled Note for Barrett, lasted over 2 minutes. I put on headphones and played it. My heart nearly stopped at his voice, cold, clear, deliberate. Gianna is more defiant than I thought. But once we get through next week, I'll have her out of this house, out of the state, and out of everyone's mind. She won't stay quiet. She digs, she resists. But I swear, I'll make her disappear legally. My wife won't have to worry anymore. My family will be peaceful again. I recorded it on my phone and copied the file onto the USB. After clearing the history and putting everything back exactly, I slipped the drive out just as he returned with a beer in hand. I stood at the counter, peeling an apple like I'd been there all along. "Since when do you like apples so much?" he asked. "My biology teacher said they reduce stress." I took a slice, chewing calmly. He chuckled, poured his beer, and walked away. That night, I sat in my room, hands trembling as I held the USB wrapped tight with white tape. I didn't dare store anything on my own laptop. Everything would go to Aunt Karen through secure mail the next morning. But before that, I needed one more safeguard. I slipped a recording phone under the dining table where Mark often sat late at night to make calls. I left a workbook nearby as cover, set the device, and left. As expected, around 10 p.m., he made a call. "I'll speed things up," Mark muttered. "She's starting to look at me like she wants to kill me. I don't trust her. A 15-year-old shouldn't have eyes like that. Better to get her out sooner, so I don't have to see her face anymore." At midnight, I retrieved the phone, saved the clip onto a second device, and hid it in an old ice cream tub at the bottom of the freezer where no one ever touched. The next morning, while Mom cooked breakfast and Mark was in the shower, I walked 3 blocks to the post office. I mailed the USB to Aunt Karen with a tracked delivery. Then I sent another sealed envelope addressed to myself at school, containing a copy of the audio file. No one knew. That evening, Mark called me to the living room. Mom sat beside him, looking uneasy. He fixed his eyes on me. "We need to talk." I sat down, nodded. "Yes? You'll be gone for a while. For treatment. It's what's best for you and for the family." I pressed my lips together, took a deep breath. "If that's what you think is best, then I agree." Mom lifted her head, eyes full of doubt. But I looked only at Mark, my gaze blank as paper. That was when I saw him relax, his body easing just a bit. A smirk flickered across his face, the look of a man sure he was about to win. But he didn't know. I was 3 steps ahead, and this game I held the trump card. That evening, a soft rain tapped against the porch roof like a quiet omen. In the living room, Mark wore a white shirt with rolled sleeves, face calm but eyes gleaming with anticipation. On the table lay a stack of papers titled Clear Horizons Academy Special Intake File. He carefully poured himself a glass of whiskey, sat down, picked up a pen. "Almost done," he muttered to himself. I sat a few feet away, clutching a textbook to hide the pounding in my chest. In minutes, if nothing interrupted, he would sign that contract. And I would vanish from this world like a discarded file. The doorbell rang just as his pen touched the paper. Both he and Mom turned their heads. I didn't move. Who could it be at this hour? Linda frowned, setting down her cloth. Mark walked to the door. Seconds later, he stepped back as if doused with cold water. On the porch stood Aunt Karen in a thick coat, holding a heavy envelope, beside an older man with silver hair and glasses, Lawyer McAdams. Behind them were two uniformed social workers with ID badges on their chests. Mark Stephen Morrison? The man spoke, his voice steady, deep. We've been asked to immediately halt any guardianship transfer upon evidence suggesting this is an act of personal liberty violation and psychological abuse. Mark froze, lips trembling. What do you think you're doing in my house? He spat. I'm Karen Morrison, Gianna's aunt, my aunt said, eyes fixed on me. And I have strong reason to believe my niece is being manipulated and about to be taken away against her will. Mom stepped out, stunned. Karen? What is this? You should look at this before you ask, Karen said, opening the envelope and handing Mom a USB and a stack of printed photos. Everything came from Gianna. Data from Mark's computer, recordings, and images from the hidden camera she found in her room. Mom took them, her hands shaking. Mark spun toward me, his face red. What have you done? I sat still, staring straight at him. I only protected myself. The social worker stepped forward, asking everyone to stay calm. One opened a laptop, plugged in the USB, and played a video. Mark's voice on the phone with the facility. Get her out of this house, out of the state, out of everyone's mind. I'll make her disappear legally. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Linda stammered, What is this? No, it can't be. Karen laid out a series of photos taken from the tiny camera I had found taped behind the picture frame in my bedroom. Images of me changing clothes. Images of me crying alone in the corner of my bed. A screenshot clearly showing the device name, Parent Monitor, 2.3. Linda stared at the photos for a long time. The USB slipped from her hand to the floor. Her face went pale. Slowly, she stepped back, her stunned eyes fixed on Mark. You put a camera in her room? Her voice cracked. Mark growled. I did it to protect the family. She's always withdrawn, unpredictable. I didn't want anything bad to happen. I'm her mother, and I had no idea. Linda screamed, clutching her head. Oh God. Mark seemed to realize he had lost control. He lunged for the table, grabbing the stack of files to run upstairs. But before he could move far, two social workers blocked his path. You have no right to remove these documents from the premises. Well, we are conducting an investigation, the female officer said firmly. I do have the right, Mark shouted. She's a troubled kid. I can prove it. Prove it by illegally spying and filing papers to have a minor sent into forced psychological isolation without true consent from the legal guardian. Lawyer McAdams stepped forward. I'm afraid if you continue resisting, we'll request an emergency court order for a no-contact injunction and a criminal investigation for psychological abuse, invasion of privacy, and manipulation of child care records. Mark froze. His eyes darted around before he suddenly pulled out his phone, jabbing at the screen. I'll transfer everything under someone else's name. You can't take it all from me. Karen crossed her arms, standing tall. If you dare move a single dollar while under investigation, my attorney will file an additional civil suit for asset fraud. And I'm not doing this just for Gianna. I'm doing it for everything you've done to this family for years. Linda collapsed into a chair, face buried in her hands. Tears slid down uncontrollably. I believed you. I turned against my daughter to trust someone like you. The room thickened with suffocating heaviness. I quietly stepped to my mother's side, resting a hand on her shoulder. She turned to me, eyes torn and full of sorrow. But I didn't blame her. Not now. Not when her heart was shattering under the truth laid bare. Karen turned to me and gave a gentle nod. You did the right thing. And from now on, there will be people standing with you. You won't face this alone. I pressed my lips together and nodded. It wasn't over. But this time, I wouldn't be walking through the dark by myself. I moved in with Aunt Karen on a quiet morning when golden sunlight stretched across the tree-lined street. My old suitcase rolled over the bricks with its familiar clatter. In my hand, besides a few essentials, was a sealed envelope, an acceptance letter from a small university in northern Vermont, majoring in applied psychology. I hadn't opened it yet, but just seeing my name printed on the cover made my chest tighten. Aunt Karen opened the door, still wearing her gardening gloves, the scent of damp soil and lavender drifting from the porch. "Are you hungry? There's fresh apple pie in the kitchen." I nodded without saying a word. Her eyes alone told me that from the moment I stepped into this house, I was safe. In the days that followed, I began therapy with Dr. Laura Blake, a woman in her early 50s, slender, her voice warm like a winter fireplace. She didn't bombard me with questions or scribble cold notes like the specialists I'd met before. She listened. She let me choose when to open up and when to sit in silence. "I feel guilty when my mom cries. But I'm angry too," I blurted out during the sixth session, staring at a loose thread on my sleeve. "Gianna, feelings are never wrong. It's only how we respond to them that creates consequences," she said softly. I stayed quiet for a long moment before asking, "Do you think my mom can really change?" Laura didn't answer right away. After a pause, she said, "If remorse is followed by consistent action, without placing expectations on the one who was hurt, then yes. But forgiveness is your right, not your responsibility." Linda sent letters every week. No excuses. No pleas for forgiveness. Just short, handwritten notes about leaving Mark for good, about joining a support group for women who had been psychologically manipulated. She said she was learning how to be a mother again. I didn't reply, but I read them, and I kept them in a small wooden box on my desk, just beneath the window that looked out at the garden. Mark was different. He vanished from my sight, but not from the legal system. Police reopened old records, 2 civil suits from his ex-wife for controlling behavior, an unpaid credit, judgment from over 6 years ago, and multiple signs of guardianship abuse in his submissions to Clear Horizons. Aunt Karen told me not to worry. Every trace he leaves builds another legal wall between him and you. The USB containing all the evidence, recordings, emails, images now sat in lawyer McAdams' safe, guarded with 2-factor security, with another copy stored in a legal archive. I called it the permanent shield. If he ever tried to come back, everything would go straight to the authorities and the local press. I graduated high school in June. No one waited for me in the front row. Aunt Karen sat in the second row, eyes red behind her glasses, clapping gently as I received my diploma from the principal. Linda didn't show up, but that morning I found a bouquet of carnations placed quietly at the doorstep. No card, but I recognized the clumsy knot on the red ribbon. It was hers. That afternoon, I opened the university letter. My name was printed clearly, along with a partial scholarship for students with special circumstances. My hand rested on the line, "Welcome to our community," and warmth spread through my chest, as if a piece of me had finally healed, even though shards still remained. That night, Aunt Karen baked almond cake and turned on a small radio playing jazz. We sat on the porch, not saying much. I leaned my head on her shoulder, breathing fully for the first time. "Are you scared to leave?" she asked, her voice like wind through the trees. I thought for a moment, then whispered, "I'm not afraid to begin. I'm only afraid of going back. But now I know I'm not alone anymore." She squeezed my hand gently, saying nothing more. That night, I wrote in my journal, "I was once prey, hunted down. Now I'm a survivor, and I am moving forward." Have you ever felt like an outsider in the very place called family? Have you ever been forced into silence, living under someone else's expectations until think you forgot the sound of your own voice? I lived through that. I was watched, controlled, nearly erased from my own life, all because I dared to speak out. But from that darkness, I discovered this. As long as there is even one person who believes you, one hand reaching out at the right time, you can keep going. No one deserves to live imprisoned by fear, and no one should be stripped of the right to choose their own life. If you've ever experienced something similar, or if you have thoughts about my journey, share them in the comments. I want to hear your story, the way you've listened to mine today. And if you care about stories of family, about hidden truths few dare to tell, but filled with strength and hope, hit follow. Because sometimes one story at the right moment is enough to make us pause and begin again.